like to introduce Acceleres. Today we've got Peter and Nick. Peter and Nick will be taking us through Service Manager 2012 implementation briefing. I'm sure there's going to be quite a few questions, so feel free to type them along the way, and I'll go ahead and pass those along to the guys. Just to give you a brief intro to Acceleres, I know these guys personally through the Service Manager TAP program. They're a consultancy that focuses exclusively on Service Manager, both 2010 and 2012. Great people to work with, and of course, if you have any questions or anything like that, like I said, I'll pass those along to the guys. But feel free to go ahead and take it on over, Nick and Peter.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Hey, this is Pete Coirello, and my first question for you, Chris, I seem to have lost my share button here in Link. Is it possible for you to share that presentation I uploaded?
Oh, that's a little weird. No, because I think that, well, let's see here. Yeah. So is it SCSM 2012 implementation presentation?
That's the one, yeah.
Let's go ahead and share it.
Great. That's perfect. Thank you.
Sure thing.
So, Nick, did you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Nick Datillo. I'm a consultant with Acceleres. I work on Service Manager implementations. My expertise is really around management pack authoring and customizations, custom reporting, more the technical side of Service Manager. Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, as I said, my name's Pete Coirello. I'm also a consultant with Acceleres, and I tend to work more on the functional side. So I usually work with customers to gather requirements and to help define the configuration. And what we want to do today is we want to take a look at the Service Manager 2012 beta. This will be kind of a broad brush. 2010 is a pretty big application, and 2012 is even bigger. There's a lot to it. So we're going to try to highlight what we think are some of the most interesting and significant points about the application, about what's new, specifically prerequisites, integration, and functionality. And then at the end of the presentation, we want to talk about implementation considerations. And within that, we want to talk about the upgrade path. And then we want to talk about some considerations if you're planning to either implement new or migrate from 2010. I also want to say we're fortunate to have Travis Wright from Microsoft with us. So Travis, I hope you don't mind if we throw a question or two, or maybe more than two, your way along the way.
I know he told me he had to step away for a minute. I think he'll be back in just a moment.
So Nick, over to you.
All right, great. So, so we're just going to cover what's new and improved. I'll just click through the next. We're going to start with the sort of the prerequisites, and then we're going to get into the functionality a bit, and then we'll talk about some of the integration at the end, like we just discussed. So the first thing I wanted to highlight on the prerequisite changes was in the hardware prerequisites. The minimum hardware requirements had not changed since 2010. Essentially, what I think that means to us is if you've got Service Manager 2010 installed in a production environment and you run the upgrade, your hardware should support it after the upgrade. The changes that have been made are in scalability. So you can now scale up to 50,000 users and have it be performant by adding additional hardware. But if you've got the same capacity in your current environment and you run the upgrade, it should run on your current hardware. That being said, there have been then software requirement changes. So the prereqs for software have changed. On the client side, for the consoles no longer are supported with Windows XP. Windows Vista Service Pack 2 or Windows 7 Professional or Ultimate Service Pack 1 or later is required to install the client on. So we know for a few of our clients that poses a potential issue. There are some workarounds for that if you're not prepared to do a client upgrade, things like terminal services. things like that. But that is one of the changes in the prerequisites. The clients will also require PowerShell 1.0 and Silverlight 4 for the new portal, which we'll talk about a little bit later. On the management servers and on the data warehouse management server, it's going to require Windows Server 2008 R2, SP1. You want to, if you just got R2, you want to upgrade to SP1 before you do the upgrade. And on the management server, it's also going to require Microsoft Analysis Management Objects, which is SQL Server Analysis Management Objects. That's a new requirement because of changes that have been made to the data warehouse, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So those are based on SQL analysis services. So you'll need analysis management objects on the management server so it can process the cubes. Also, both or any of your management servers will require PowerShell 2.0 to work with the new SMlets, the 1.0 release of the SMlets. And the portal has been revamped completely. So the old portal is going away. If you're running an upgrade, the old portal will just continue to exist in IIS. But the new portal's been built, which is based on SharePoint. So you'll need SharePoint in 2010 installed then to deploy the portal. All right. So on to some of the integration changes then. Really, when we talk about integration and Service Manager, that's sort of the technical medium over which that happens is connectors. So in Service Manager 2010, we had connectors for Active Directory, Configuration Manager, and Operations Manager. The biggest changes really for Configuration Manager and Operations Manager in the connectors is really just they're being updated to support the latest versions of both of those products. Obviously, ConfigMan and OpsMan are getting new functionality in the 2012 releases, so that's going to bring new functionality to Service Manager through those connectors. So that's sort of the biggest change. With Active Directory, they're introducing the ability to use custom LDAP queries, which will allow you to filter which objects are coming across the AD connector much more specifically. It was a little bit more difficult in the old product. You kind of brought in either an OU or the whole domain, and then you could specify individual objects. And now you can write an LDAP query to, I guess, more easily bring just the data you need from Active Directory into Service Manager. The Exchange Connector is also being improved. I think Travis said he was working on coding that right now as we speak. So that's going to get a new version. It's not complete, and no versions of the Exchange Connector are currently compatible with Service Manager 2012 beta. But there is going to be additional functionality in the new Exchange Connector. I don't have any real definitive data on what that functionality is going to be. There's been talk of things like supporting incident reassignment through email, selecting an incident template during the resolution of an incident. But this has all been early conversation, and we're not sure what's going to make it in or not. But it is going to have improvements, so we wanted to mention that was going to be there. We just don't have a copy of it working yet.
Is Travis back by any chance to speak to that?
It looks like he's still muted.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So with all that, that's the existing integration that's being improved. There's also going to be new integration. So Orchestrator and VMM then are going to get their own connectors. So the VMM connector is going to bring in VMM objects like VMs, services, clouds, things like that. It's also going to bring in library data like your VM templates. And that data will be available as configuration items in Service Manager then. In addition to the data you normally get about like your virtual servers, things that came over OpsMan or AD, you'll be able to tell what hosts they're on, what their logical network is, things like that. There's also going to be the Orchestrator Connector. What this is going to do then is it's going to bring Orchestrator runbooks into Service Manager. And then we can invoke those runbooks from Service Manager activities, which is a little bit of a change from the way we had to do it before. Before, we can still have Opalis integrate with Service Manager, but the Service Manager had no knowledge of Opalis's existence. So in order to invoke workflows, we would have to have Opellus monitor service manager events and then pick those up and use that to trigger workflows. Now it's a whole lot easier because we can add an automated activity, we can tell it what Chromebook we want, and that'll automatically map those properties across. So it sort of enables that automation, which becomes particularly important when we start talking about the service catalog. It's one of the big new features we'll get in a little bit later in the presentation. And of course, Orchestrator integrates not just with Service Manager, it's got integration with the other System Center products and third-party tools like VMware and other things too. So you're through the Orchestrator Connector, you can now have like real cross-platform automation through the service catalog using System Center Orchestrator. We'll talk about some of the scenarios and use cases for that a little bit later. But this connector is key to that functioning. All right, Pete, I think I'll turn it back over to you then for the functionality piece of the conversation.
Sure, yeah, we wanted to talk about either new features or improvements in functionality in these 6 areas: in incident management, service level, service request, end user self-service, reporting and analytics, and then change and release management. As I mentioned earlier, some of this will be kind of broad brush. What we've done is we've highlighted some things that we think are pretty cool. We'll start with incident management. One of the new features in the incident work item is the ability to have parent and child incident relationships. So I think this becomes useful if you're doing or want to do major incidents and you wanted to, say, take a bunch of individual incidents and to link them to an overall parent that might represent the major incident. You can see in the top of this screenshot of IR42 here, it says parent incident. I'm sorry, IR44. It says parent incident IR42. Kind of looks like the manual or review activity where you can see the parent work item, and then in the left-hand screenshot, you can see some of the global settings that are available for the parent incident with respect to the way that child incidents would be resolved, with the way the child incidents would be auto-reactivated, and with status changes for child incidents. So I think that's pretty cool. As I said, I think if you're doing or want to do major incidents, we have some clients now that use problems for major incidents. This gives you a little bit more flexibility. The other thing that we thought was pretty nice is on the right-hand side, we've got this snapshot of the task pane in the incident. And you can see at the very bottom, set first response or comment. We've had, again, a number of clients who've been looking for the ability to mark an acknowledged or response time in an incident. And you can do that now right out of the box. You can set this first response, and we'll see in a second it'll capture that, and it'll allow you to actually set a metric on that. So again, I think that's pretty nice. Chris, if you could advance, please. This is one of the things that I think a lot of people have been eager to see and have been looking forward to, and that's the service level management functionality. It really is nice. There's a lot of new functionality. We'll touch on this in the next couple of slides. This is just a shot of the service level tab on the new incident form. So you can see here that we've actually got, in this case, 2 SLOs that are active for this particular incident. And again, we'll look at this in a little bit more detail the next couple of slides. We've got a resolve SLO and a response SLO. And Chris, if I could ask you to advance again, please. We'll look at what goes into an SLO. There are basically 3 parts to it. The first part is the calendar. And again, this is another thing that I know a lot of our clients have been interested in, and that's the ability to set multiple calendars and calendars that are based on business hours. In Service Manager 2010, obviously you've got a 24/7 clock or calendar. Here you can see I've gone in and I've configured just a standard business hour calendar, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. You can also see that I've gone in and I've set a couple of holidays in there. I don't know if there's a limit on the number of calendars. Again, maybe when Travis rejoins, we can ask about that. But you can set up multiple calendars, so you could maintain a 24/7. You could have multiple business hour calendars. Potentially have a calendar, say, for U.S., a different calendar for Canada, for Europe, or UK. You could also have a vendor calendar if you've got maybe a vendor that's managing part of your data center, and they have a different SLO or SLA. So, Chris, if I could ask you to advance again. So, as I said, we've got three parts. The two other parts here, we've got configurable metrics. If you look at on the left, this is just a response time metric, which, as you can see at the very bottom, is measuring between these two start and end dates. I've selected the created date for the incident. You can see the class is incident, and the first response date. So that goes back to that slide that we looked at before. So very, very easy to set up, and this will give you, I think, just about every date possible within the relevant class. On the right-hand side, we can see part 3 is kind of putting it all together into the overall SLO. So we've gone and we've set up an SLO. Now, I've broken this up by priority. So this is a response time for a priority 2 incident. So we know that response time is created date, the difference between created date and response date. You can see at the very bottom that the SLOs are getting applied to queues, which, for those who are not aware, are just groups of like work items. So you can see I've just set up 3 queues at the bottom. I've set up a priority 1, a priority 2, priority 3 incident queue. And of course, you can put any sort of criteria that you want into queues. So again, we might, instead of using priority in a queue, we might use support group in a queue. Going back to the previous example that I gave, say having a special SLO for maybe a vendor support group. So I think it's really cool functionality, and again, I think a lot of our customers are going to be eager to work with this.
And some of the other things then I think you can do with being able to apply these SLOs to queues. Some of the things we've talked about is you can create a queue based on a relationship. So if you've got incidents that are related to certain servers and configuration items or to certain users who might be a VIP user, you can apply a different SLO to them. So you can have, say, tighter SLOs or a 24-hour clock for business critical servers, things like that. We've got that kind of flexibility as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Nick and I had talked about that before, about, there really are a lot of possibilities. As with a lot of things in Service Manager 2012, the more possibilities, the more planning. So I'm sure you're starting to get that idea. So Chris, if you could advance, please. And this kind of, I think, goes along with the SLO. I mean, certainly it isn't only applicable to the SLO, but you've got periodic notification capability now. In 2010, we can notify based on a record being created or a record being updated, or in some cases a record being deleted. Now we can notify periodically based on criteria. So what I've set up here is just a notification that is going to be triggered when the target warning date, and this would be for an SLO, is less than or equal to now. And then you can see we've got it set up to run every 15 minutes, and it'll keep recurring. I don't know that we'd necessarily configure it that way in a production environment, but you can see that you've got the ability to either set no end date or to pick a specific number of occurrences. So again, this is something that in 2010 we'd have to do with a custom workflow. We can now do natively in 2012. And another nice piece of functionality added to the notification is the ability to notify a related recipient. So right now, if we want to notify a related recipient, we have to do that as a workflow. We can now do that within the notification, in addition to notifying specific recipients. So in this case, think about the idea of putting this together with the SLO. The warning date passes, and now we can send an email to the assigned to user and the primary owner, letting them know that the warning date has passed for the SLO for that particular incident.
Probably worth mentioning then also that you can still send notifications to related recipients in the workflows area of the console. You just also can send them in the notifications piece as well.
Yeah, I don't know if you took a close look at it, Nick. I didn't see a lot of differences in the workflow, in the way that you would configure workflows.
No, I haven't either. It looks largely the same.
Chris, could you advance, please? Thanks. Okay, so this is another thing that I think a lot of folks have been eager to see. And there's a lot to this whole concept of service request fulfillment. We've got a screenshot here of the new service request work item, but there's a lot more to service request fulfillment in Service Manager 2012 than just the work item. It's interesting when you look at this. I think what a lot of people have envisioned is the service request being kind of like a combination of an incident and a change request, and that's kind of what the form looks like. It's got elements of both forms. So you can see we've got, if you look at tabs, we've got familiar tabs. We also have the ability to set service levels for these service requests. Now, it's a little bit different than an incident, but more like a change when we look at urgency, priority, area. We can associate this with a support group. But as I said, service request fulfillment is in my view, kind of a big idea in Service Manager 2012, and it goes well beyond just the addition of this new work item. Which again I think is going to be very, very at least convenient for a lot of our clients and I'm sure folks in the meeting who are using 2010 have probably been a little bit challenged with, well, what's the best way to handle a service request? Do we use the incident work item? Do we use the change request work item? But Chris, if I could ask you to advance again, please. We'll look at kind of where Microsoft has gone with this. So again, beyond just the service request work item, we've got this concept of the service catalog. So the overall set of IT services available to customers, obviously very familiar, for those who are knowledgeable about service management. Then we've got within that service offerings, which are the IT services that are more kind of broad and categorical, like desktop services, messaging, connectivity, network services, those sorts of things. And then nested within that, we have request offerings. And this is where we're kind of down to that work item level, the individual self-serviceable requests that reside within the offering. So we could have multiple request offerings within the overall service offering that resides within the service catalog. And I think we have on the next slide kind of illustration of this that I'm going to let Nick speak to.
Okay, yeah, so let me grab the pointer here. Hopefully this works. Really what we're trying to illustrate here is just how do we roll up this idea of having a service catalog with offerings, service offerings, and request offerings in it. Sort of how do we roll that up into actual business services? How is that going to appear to your end users and to your analysts? So sort of how does this all play together? And I guess the idea is that you've got your end users, analysts, administrators, VM admins, your management. You've got your entire organization really, who in the future is going to be able to interact with Service Manager in a few different ways. there's going to be the new self-service portal, which is going to surface all of those request offerings based on user role. You can specify that a certain group of users gets access to a certain group of request offerings. And you've got the data warehouse OLAP queues are going to be surfaced to people to allow self-service reporting. I want to focus on sort of the portal path up into Service Manager then, because we'll talk about the data warehouse a little bit later. And really what we're getting with this is an ability to provide self-service to the organization through the use of the service catalog and the self-service portal. What it'll let us do is in our request offerings create personalized forms that folks will be able to fill out and provide. You'll be able to ask the right questions up front when somebody's requesting a service on the portal. You can use that to literally map the answers to properties in your service request and in any of the activities within your service request. So if you think about service requests, it's kind of like we talked about when you look at the form, it's a bit of a hybrid between incident and change. So you get service level management, just like you do an incident. You can assign a support group to it. You can assign it to a user, those sorts of things. But it's more like a change when you look at it at its activities. The activity pane is identical to the activity pane within a change request. And what we can do then is map all the individual parts of the service request that need to be completed in order to fulfill the request. And then we can ask relevant questions of the user up front so we can gather all the data that we need. So for instance, if it's something simple like a new user request, we can create a request offering for a new user. We can have activities inside the service request for all of the different things that we need to do when a new user comes on board, like create an account for them, make sure they have access to email, a computer, and will be available to them, a desk will be available, cell phone, whatever. Assign those out to all of the relevant people who are responsible for those different tasks. And then we can ask all of the information that we need up front. So we can make sure that we're getting the user's first name and their last name. We could ask questions like what department are they in, what's their job title, do they have any special access to certain applications that they're going to need. And we can gather this information so by the time it hits the service desk or the group of folks who are going to need to action these services, these service requests, they've got all of the data they need. The other thing that that's going to let us do is it's going to let us, since we can ensure that we've got the data available because you can't click next until you fill out all the fields, it's going to allow us to do orchestration and automation much more reliably. So because we'll make sure that we've got all the bits of data that we need in order for a particular run, flow, and orchestrator to work up front, then we can reliably pass that data over to Orchestrator and have it automate some things for us. For instance, creating a username. So if we ask for the user's first name and last name and we have a role that says our username's our first name dot last name, we can have Orchestrator go and create that account in Active Directory based on the user's job title and department. We can have that Orchestrator workflow go and add it to some relevant groups and complete some of the process for us automatically. So I think you can sort of see some of the flexibility or the power that gives you in terms of automation and that sort of self-service idea. One of the points I guess we want to make with this presentation too is when you've got that kind of flexibility and you've got that capability to do this automation and you can get very sophisticated with the kind of workflows you need, and it's really going to demand a higher level of planning and a higher level of thought and making sure that you've mapped all of these things out ahead of time. So it's and what Service Manager doesn't provide for you with this is a framework for the way you want to use it. That's going to have to come from your organizational requirements. So one of the points we want to make is just that you have to be particularly careful, especially around the service catalog, and making sure that you've planned all of these things out, that you have an idea of different things that you're going to want to be able to make available, and that you've thought through the use case enough that you've covered all of your bases and that it'll function for you. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the implementation part, but I just wanted to preface that here and say that there's going to be more so than in Service Manager 2010, some upfront planning and decision making that needs to happen to enable this functionality. There isn't a, say, out-of-the-box solution for some of these things.
Hey, Nick, just a couple of points that I'd like you to clarify. One is that the data that we would be capturing, when if I'm the end user at the SharePoint portal who is completing a request, the input that I'm providing is going into properties that have been added to the CMDB. Is that correct?
That's correct. So when you're asking those questions on the request offering, you're asking those questions in the SharePoint portal. Those values have to be mapped to a property that already exists within the CMDB. There is no temporary storage. So if you want to track something like what is the user's first name and last name going to be, there needs to be a place in Service Manager to hold that data. So an activity, obviously by default, doesn't have a user's first name and last name field. So you need to make a decision about how you're going to capture that information. And that sometimes is going to require extending Service Manager and then customizing the forms with new fields so you can capture that data.
Okay, good. I'm glad you clarified that, because that was one of the things that I know I was curious about before we saw the product, and one of the things that I know we've had a couple of conversations about, and I'm sure other people are maybe curious about. The second question is, and I think you mentioned this before, but again, I just wanted you to clarify that you can get fairly granular, I believe, with what service requests or request offerings, I guess I should say, are available to which users.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a good point, because one of the things that we need to consider now when we're doing an implementation that we hadn't had to consider before is permissions for an entire organization. So before we were just concerned with IT, making sure that analysts had access to incidents, making sure that our change management teams had access to the change management parts of Service Manager. And what we've introduced now is the potential for us wanting to give access through the portal to your entire organization. So there's going to be then, of course, a fair amount of planning around making sure that we've got that we've thought through and that we're giving access to folks, especially when you introduce automation. You want to be careful that you still have visibility and control over what requests are going to be made. So there's going to be some planning and some thought needed there too, since we have to consider how this is going to touch all of your end users. I mean, before you had an end user portal, but there wasn't a whole lot more that somebody could do than create an incident for themselves in the end user portal. And now, especially if you're going, like I said, to unlock this automation capability, we need to be extra careful that we're only giving access to folks who are going to need access and who warrant access to do certain things in Service Manager, since we're surfacing a lot more of the product to them through the portal.
Yeah, and well, as you say, we'll talk a bit about planning considerations later on, but yeah, this is definitely, while very nice functionality, it's definitely something that's going to take a lot of careful planning and consideration.
Yeah.
So, Chris, if we could ask you to, this is one, in fact, Nick and I were just talking about the new release work item before we got on. We've had a little bit of time to look at this. I was hoping, and it looks like Travis is still away. I was kind of hoping that Travis could help us to wrap our heads around this one, because we do have, as you can see, a new work item for a release record. And as you can imagine, the release record relates closely to change requests and links through to the change request through dependent activities. I have to be honest, we haven't really been able to fully grasp the application of the release work item. This is where I was hoping that Travis could maybe speak to this a little bit and help to clarify exactly how the two are going to be used together. Well, Travis will hop on in a few, so maybe we'll hold on that until Travis can join. A couple of other things that are a bit more straightforward. one thing that you've got now is the ability to record planned and actual downtime. Again, back to customer requirements, we've had a few of our customers want or need to record downtime within their changes, and obviously we can't do that out of the box in 2010. We have in some cases just done extensions to the change request to add those properties, but now it's native functionality, and it appears in the scheduling tab. If you see the third tab from the left in the release work item, the release record work item, that's where this downtime scheduling appears. And the other thing that we've got now are builds and environments, so that you can specify software versions, different environments like pre-production, staging, test, etc. Nick, I don't know if you have anything you want to say about builds and environments within release management.
Yeah, basically that's it. You can track them separately, your different environments. You can have a build environment and then a test environment and then a production environment, and you can track them through builds. You can track which versions of your applications or your software are in each of those versions, so you can follow it through. So when you're building a release and associated changes to roll out a new version of some maybe homegrown software that you guys have built, you can track all of the old version that was there, where that was implemented, where the new versions of that software are going to be implemented, and when it should be rolled out to each of the different environments, giving you that kind of greater visibility into what's going on.
Cool. Okay, Chris, if we could. And then we've got a bunch of new well, I shouldn't say a bunch of new. We've got a few new activity types. We've got our old favorites, our review activities, and our manual activities. The new activities are sequential and parallel activities, two different kinds of activities. And the sequential and the parallel activities are more like containers for activities. I wanted to get a screenshot of this in here, and I just wasn't able to get it in time, so I apologize. I think that would make it a little bit clearer. But I think, again, if you're familiar with Service Manager 2010, you're familiar with the idea of parallel activities, in that in an incident, if you put incidents into an activities into an incident, you can complete those activities in any order that you would like. And in the change request, the activities are sequential. They must be completed in a specific order. So now you've got the ability to use both types of incidents, sequential and parallel, within one overall work item. And then you've also got this dependent activity, which allows you to link through. This is how you're going to link deployment activities in change requests to release records. And it's actually done within the activity itself. I believe, Nick, you right-click the dependent activity, and then you have the ability from there, if you're in the release record, to then choose a dependent activity in a change request.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess you can think of it as dependent activity is the pipeline or the method for which we can relate release records to a change request activity. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I apologize again for not getting a screenshot in here, because in this case, a picture really would help to make this a little bit clearer. So Chris, if you could advance this, please.
All right. So yeah, I'll take this. So the data warehouse has had some significant improvements over the last version, primarily around leveraging SQL Server analysis services, which means that we're going to be able to have out of the box and then build our own OLAP cubes. So for those of you who aren't aware, an OLAP cube is it's an object that has pre-aggregated data that allows quick and easy analysis. And what that really is going to mean for us is it's going to enable ad hoc and self-service reporting with familiar tools and no coding required. So in the past, if you needed to get some custom reported data out of Service Manager, it was a process like you'd have to build some SQL queries or a report model in order to get the raw data in that you need, and then you build a report in a tool like Visual Studio or BIDS, Business Intelligence Development Studio, in order to turn that raw data into a report and do calculations and add pretty pictures and things like that. Now what we can do, since we have these overlap cubes, is we can connect to them from Excel. So everyone's familiar with Excel, and now you'll be able to open up either from the console, you'll be able to launch Excel from one of the cubes, or you'll be able to open up Excel and connect to one of the cubes manually. And that's going to give you basically your standard pivot table functionality. You'll have a bunch of data, a bunch of properties that you can drag, and metrics that are all predefined that you can drag into a report and build fairly comprehensive, complex reports just by dragging and dropping properties around. Since it's a pivot table, you get all the pivot table type functionality. You can slice and dice the data in lots of different ways. And since it's bringing metrics in, we can set KPIs. So we can say, get a measurement of something like the percentage of incidents that were resolved within SLA. And then we can define what's good, what's okay, and what's bad. So what's red, amber, and green, for instance. We can make those definitions and publish that then as a report. So we've got it in Excel. We can make any changes quickly and easily in Excel if we need to update the report with new columns, or we want to slice it and dice it in a different way. So maybe we're looking at the time to resolve incidents by the classification of the incident. And maybe instead of doing that, I want to see, well, show me the time to resolve incidents by support group. And you can make that change just by switching two properties around in a pivot table.
So
the other thing that...
I'm sorry. Nick, I just have a quick question. We've had a number of our clients who've invested in a number of custom reports in Service Manager 2010.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So the SSRS reporting back end of Service Manager is still there. So any custom reports you have built now, and also the data warehouse schema hasn't changed. It's just been added onto. So any existing custom reports that you have in your environment will still work after you run an upgrade. All the data is still in the same spots, and you can in the future still build SSRS reports in Visual Studio if you want. That functionality is still going to be fully supported. You can think of this as sort of extra functionality that isn't really impacting the existing pieces. The other thing that you're going to get then, apart from building reports in Excel, is you'll be able to build and publish reports and metrics and KPIs to SharePoint 2010 using standard SharePoint 2010 tools. So you'll be able to build all of these different types of KPIs and reports. You'll be able to define, again, what is good, okay, or bad, and you'll be able to publish those to a SharePoint site in SharePoint 2010. Based again on these OLED cubes. So that's another big advantage is you always could publish reports as web parts to SharePoint, but now you can do it using standard SharePoint tools. It's much easier. You can build it right in the SharePoint environment. So if you are a SharePoint administrator, which it sounds like some of you are, you'll be pretty familiar with this, and it'll be pretty straightforward in terms of getting a dashboard that's specific to your environment together. Which sort of brings me to the last point about the data warehouse we want to cover, which is the specific to your environment part. Service Manager 2012's data warehouse is going to provide the single System Center 2012 data warehouse for all of the products. So if you're familiar with the way it works in 2010, you've got a DW data mart for Service Manager. You're going to then get data warehouses for the other System Center products, Operations Manager, Configuration Manager, VMM, and I see Anton saying except DPM, which is a good point. And what that means you're going to be able to do then is using OLAP cubes to aggregate this data from all of these different sources. And by the way, you can extend it to attach to non-system center sources as well. It'll be able to attach onto something like an HR system and bring data over like that. It's not going to be automated. It's something that you would have to do and would take manual work. But you can bring in data from other sources as well. But in the System Center world, what you can do now is you've got access to all of this data from all of these different sources in a single place. So you can relate things together that you didn't necessarily have to relate to. For instance, if you wanted to see your alert to ticket or alert to incident ratio, you can do that more easily now because you've got the amount of alerts that have been generated by your operations manager available along with the incidents that were created through alerts. You've got all of your VMM data in, so you can get much more rich information about the incidents that are affecting your VMs because you can look at all of the VM data that you've got in VMM about the particular server. So you can get more at the root cause of why you've got maybe a spike in incidents that are generated from Operations Manager. Or you can now track, more easily if you've got recurring incidents for a particular VM, you've got more data there that allow you to hopefully more easily get to the root cause of why there's been a spike in a number of incidents for that particular server.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the implementation considerations. We've gone through some of the new and improved features, and now it's time to talk about what it might look like to move forward. So the first thing we'll talk about is the upgrade path. The supported path is an in-place upgrade. And again, Nick, maybe you should speak to this one.
Yep, no problem. Just replying to a question here. Yeah, so right now the supported upgrade path is only an in-place upgrade. Basically, what's at the root of this is no 2010 components of Service Manager are compatible with any 2012 components of Service Manager, which basically means that you've got to do an in-place upgrade, and it has to be done on all of the components at once. So that's your Service Manager management server, that's the data warehouse, and all of your consoles need to be upgraded. So none of the old version stuff is going to be compatible with the new version stuff. So this obviously has certain implications to it, primarily around the limited time window for the upgrade. So since we've got to bring all of these things up, and it's not going to be, essentially Service Manager won't be functional again until you've upgraded all of the individual bits and pieces, then at least our clients and the message that we're getting, and I guess our feelings right now is that that's going to mean there will be a limited time window for the upgrade, especially in a production environment. That could, it's going to have to be, and since it is a big bang upgrade too, you've got to be careful just around the disaster recovery planning in case the upgrade fails. We'll talk about, I think, in the next slide or two, that specific process, but I think the important takeaway here is that in-place upgrades are the only supported. Rolling or side-by-side upgrades are not officially supported by Microsoft. And I think that's sort of the big message there. The other thing we wanted to cover here was your customizations that you've made in Service Manager 2010, how those are going to be handled before and after the upgrade. So we already talked about reports. Any custom reports you've got in 2010 should still function after you've done the upgrade to 2012. Because the schema, the existing schema in 2010 isn't changing with the upgrade to 2012, then any properties that you've added, any schema extensions that you've made should be okay in your upgrade to 2012. So you can think of the schema as just having had things added onto it. The existing stuff should all still be there. So if you've added new properties to the incident class, when you run the upgrade, those new properties should still be there. All of the data should still be available for them before you have the upgrade. All right. Form customizations are probably going to need revision. If you've seen some of the screenshots or if you've installed the beta, you'll see that the forms have had things added to them themselves. They've had visual updates. So you'll need to most likely handle your forms, go in and edit them and update them so that they're going to be compatible with the new versions. One of the things to consider too is that we've done a lot of customizations for clients in the past to provide certain functionality that's provided in Service Manager now. So your decision's not always going to be to get these things working after the upgrade. Sometimes you're going to be retiring some of your customizations because it's been superseded by built-in functionality. So some form customizations you had, like, I don't know, we've added downtime, start and end date to the change form. Well, we don't need to carry those over because we've got downtime now in independent activities and in release management. So you'll need to think about that as well. That brings me to the next piece, which is workflow. It's the same kind of idea. The workflows should function after the upgrade, but they may not be needed depending on what they were used for. So we've had workflows to do certain things like recurring notifications. We're not going to need those custom workflows anymore because we can rebuild them using standard functionality. So you need to look at each of your customizations on a case-by-case basis to understand whether it's going to be needed anymore or not. The portal, as we talked about, the portal doesn't get an upgrade. It will just persist in your environment. You can just shut the website down in IIS. It's just the new portal is going to be installed into SharePoint 2010. So there's no real upgrade considerations. But if you've made customizations to your old portal, those obviously are going to be lost because there's no upgrade process for that. It's a complete tear the old one down, bring the new one up kind of thing. That being said, the new portal is significantly different than the old portal, and it's likely that some of the customizations, if it's any of the sort of typical customizations that we make to portals, they're not really required in the new one because you've got more control over what buttons appear and things like that. And the other thing I think with this line, supported in production, the only upgrade path that's going to be supported in production for non-TAP early adopter programs is the latest version of Service Manager 2010 upgraded to the 2012 release, RTM. So upgrading 2010 to the 2012 beta and then to the 2012 RTM is not going to be supported in production. You need to go from your 2010 production installed to the 2012 RTM version in order to get support. Yeah, thanks, Travis. Yeah, service and yeah, the latest version, 2010 SP1 CU3. And I think we touched on already, you can't mix 2010 and 2012 components, hence the in-place upgrade big bang sort of method. So, Pete, I think I'll let you take this. This is sort of, I guess, our recommendation or our thoughts so far on what the best method for upgrading from 2010 to 2012 would be.
Yeah, sure. And, you know, some of this has come from Microsoft, the idea of building your 2012 environment in a lab and then essentially designing your initial 2012 functionality in your lab environment. That's going to give you the opportunity to determine, as Nick had mentioned before, if and how you're going to migrate functionality. You know, if you've got a customization in 2010 that you're not going to need in 2012, well, how are you going to make the switch? Which new features are you going to need, are you going to use? The nice thing is that you don't have to worry about the data. I think that's the nice thing about the in-place upgrade. So you've got to do all your configuration and your testing in the lab, and then do your training in the lab too. And that's one thing that, and I'm sure a lot of folks in the meeting have dealt with this. Training is really important, not only for analysts, but for administrators as well. And of course, if you're going to be transitioning the portal, then you're going to have some conditioning to do for your end users as well. So all of that obviously would have to happen in the lab environment. And because it's an in-place upgrade, obviously a lot of planning and a solid rollback plan in the event that things do not go as planned. Obviously, with a production environment, presumably there isn't going to be a lot of time to do this, so everything is going to have to be very, very tightly scheduled. After you do the upgrade, then you're going to have your 2012 lab environment and your 2012 production environment. And we've got a few clients today who maintain both test, dev, staging, whatever you'd like to call it, and production 2010 environments. And it takes a bit of work to keep those two in sync. There are some technical considerations there in terms of where and how you save certain things in management packs, as well as just good change control procedures. So that's something that's going to have to be considered if the intent is to really maintain that lab in sync with the production environment. And this last item kind of glances forward to a couple of other things that we want to talk about in the presentation, and that's the idea of expanding functionality over the longer term, meaning having some sort of plan to really take advantage of more of the functionality in Service Manager. We see this now. In 2010, many of our clients use a small percentage of 2010 functionality, and I have to believe that'll probably be the case in 2012 as well. And it's understandable because, again, there's a lot to it. It's oftentimes just difficult to do everything that you might want to do initially. So it's important to have a plan for what you're going to use when, essentially how you're going to grow into the system. So, Chris, if you could. So, the idea of this roadmap, I'm not big on the term roadmap. I think it's kind of overused, but I do think it's important because, as I said, you've got a very full-featured platform that offers you a lot of potential. I'm not sure that users necessarily work from the objectives back, meaning what are we really trying to do here, and therefore how are we going to measure our success, our effectiveness, and therefore what functionality do we want to use and how do we want to use it. I think that's the best way of approaching any sort of implementation like this, but particularly with something like Service Manager. The last bullet is something that we see a whole lot, which is that oftentimes our customers' aspirations don't really match their plan. It seems like they have very, very lofty aspirations, but they don't necessarily have a plan to get there. One of the reasons that I'm thinking so much about this planning is I see a lot of customers who have fallen out of love with whatever their current tool is, and I hate to see that happen with Service Manager, and I think some of that is down to how you plan to use the tool and how you make the most of it versus just, kind of expecting the tool to do it all for you. Chris, if you could. Also, carefully considering, how you want to work. I think it's an important point. Dave Poltorak with Accelerez often makes the point that Service Manager is about work management. It's not a technology management platform, really. It's about supporting and automating work. And we see this. It's often across work groups, and that itself adds some complexity, which, again, I think brings you back to lots of planning. There are lots and lots of possibilities. But I think, Nick, you had mentioned earlier, it's not like there's a blueprint that you can follow that says you should do it this way. And because Service Manager 2012 is going to be even more full-featured than Service Manager 2010, and because it's going to offer more possibilities, again, I just think that leads you to really being more careful in your expectations and your planning. And it's important to use the tool to provide some context. What you want to do should be looked at in the context of what the product allows you to do. And that has to be done kind of recursively with, again, that first point, what's the work that you're trying to get it to do? And I think the final point we have here is just the idea of experimentation and exploration. The beta is out. I'm sure a lot of you probably have it installed, have been tinkering with it like we have. And I think that's important. I think that the time that you spend getting to know the application and trying to figure out what it does, how it can work in your organization is very, very important. I think it's going to pay dividends when you go to actually deploy. Nick, do you have any thoughts, any comments on these last couple of slides?
Yeah, I guess, and it's difficult to maintain this focus, I think, through the project, but the focus on the objectives and the desired outcomes, the reason why you're implementing Service Manager in the first place, it's always been the key part of having a successful implementation. And I think that's even more valid with Service Manager 2012, since it has all of the additional functionality. Maintaining a focus on it doing what you need it to do in order to achieve your objectives becomes even more important. It can become kind of a black hole if you don't let that guide where you go with your configurations and where you go with how you want to use Service Manager. So keeping that at the core of the implementation has always been an important part for us. And that plays to a lot of things. It's because there isn't that sort of out-of-the-box blueprint. It's very much up to you to decide how you want to use the application. And again, in order to handle that in a way that's going to be timely and is going to give you the best results, always going back and making sure that the configurations you decide to make tie back to some requirements or to an objective ultimately. And yeah, working with the beta is the best way to do this. We typically start most of our engagements with a sort of an orientation phase, and it's for the same reason. You need to make decisions about how you want to use Service Manager within the context of what Service Manager is going to let you do. And so having that experience, tinkering with it, and understanding how it's going to react to different configurations is the best way to get an idea of what's going to be possible, especially around the more sort of complex, sophisticated things like service request and release management, where you'll need to better understand how the technology works so you can fit it to your processes.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, wouldn't you, Nick, that we probably spend in our engagements as much time helping customers understand what the application can do, modeling different configurations. I guess what I'm saying is we spend as much time helping customers think about things as we do actually configuring the application.
Absolutely. I'd say even more so. That focus is definitely on that kind of discovery process. The configurations usually aren't that time consuming. The thought really is in making sure that it's going to work for them the way they want it to work.
So I thought I saw a note somewhere about Travis showing the 2012 portal, which I have to believe a lot of people are interested in. Although I certainly people have questions that we haven't answered.
Yeah, let people kind of ask questions away. Travis, if you're available to show the portal, I think that would be awesome. I know there was quite a few questions there, and I guess back to the Acceleres guys. You had mentioned you had some questions for Travis regarding release requests as well. Definitely might be a good time.
Yeah, Travis, are you with us?
I am here. I'm with you.
All right. So release records. Can you kind of lay out the relationship between the change request, the release record, and then the activities contained in each?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the main scenarios for release management is to control the release of a set of changes. So kind of the scenario I talk about here is we have a customer that's a technology manufacturer, and they need to have their manufacturing line available as much as possible. And so what they do is they have a quarterly release window. Any change that you want to make to that manufacturing line has to happen within that quarterly release window, and they have a whole project that they organize around deploying those changes into that manufacturing line each quarter. And they do all this testing ahead of time and they actually sequence out each of the individual changes in order in case there's dependencies between the changes and so on. And so the idea is that you create a change request for each of the changes you want to make, and you create a release record which maps those changes into a single release window. So let me just kind of show you how much time do we have? Do we have enough time?
We've got about another 17, 18 minutes.
Okay. So let me just environment here.
So just while you're getting that set, so if we wanted to scale this down a bit, we've got a number of customers who have, say, weekly maintenance windows.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like the release record is not necessarily, you're not necessarily thinking of using it just for related changes, or the relationship between the changes could simply be the timing, even if the changes are essentially unrelated or won't affect one another.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So let's see. Let me share here. Yeah. All right. So let me know when you guys can see my console here.
Got it.
Got it? Okay, so let's go, let's see, I have a couple change requests here, so let me just open up one of these that's in progress. Let's take a look at this. So kind of the way it works is that you go into a given change request, you go to the Activities tab, and you're going to add in what we call a dependency activity to the process. So we'll call this make the change, right? Okay, and then we're going to apply this. And then what we do is we go and create a release record. Okay, let me just shut down some of my VMs here. What is taking so long? Okay. So, all right, so we got that going now. Now we go over here to release management. And we're just going to create a new release. Let's use the default release record. Okay, then what we do is we go over the Activities tab here, and we'll add in whatever our process is for deploying a release. And we can add in either, typically this would be like a manual activity or a automated activity that would execute something either in Service Manager or Orchestrator. I'll just use a manual activity for this example. And then what you do is you just right-click on this thing and say link to change request activity. And so go out and find all the change requests that have dependent activities in them. And you can choose that, and then it'll create a link between this manual activity or an automated activity that's part of the release and the dependent activity inside of the change request. Then what happens is, as you go through the process of implementing the release, somebody will come along and mark this completed. Whenever that's marked completed and saved to the database, that'll trigger a workflow in Service Manager that'll then go and mark the dependent activity in the change request that it's linked to as status equals completed. And then, the process would continue on inside of the change request if there were additional activities that follow that for verification or things like that. So that's the idea. So if you had multiple changes, you would have multiple either manual activities or automated activities that are defined as part of your release, and they would each be linked to a dependent activity in the corresponding change request.
Now, there's scheduling in the dependent activity, if I'm correct. Downtime scheduling.
Yeah, let's take a look.
I don't recall if there's downtime scheduling in the manual activity too.
I mean, I think let's look here. So manual activity does have a start and end time, and then you can indicate whether it's downtime or not, right down here.
Right. Okay.
So, and that's separate then from the release records downtime. That's individually for this activity, right?
Right. So on the release record over here, this is where you keep track of kind of the downtime of the entire release.
Okay, right. I got
If you kind of have an outage window for the whole release for whatever reason, then you can mark that here.
Okay, so that's kind of your release window, and then for each CI that's going to be affected, you would specify the downtime and the change dependent activities.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
All right, so was that kind of the extent of what you guys want to talk about as far as release management?
Yeah, that's it for me.
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. I'll switch over and just show you the 2012 self-service portal then. So this wasn't shown at all previously. I had to step away for a few minutes. This wasn't shown or discussed at all during the demo.
We talked about it at a high level, but no demo was done.
All right, so the new self-service portal in 2012 is a completely new rewrite of the portal. The old portal that's based on ASP.NET is no longer functions on 2012. So the new portal is based on SharePoint 2010. You can use any version of SharePoint from Foundation on up to Enterprise. And basically, the goal there is to make the self-service portal much more customizable and extensible. That was probably the #1 piece of feedback that we got back on Service Manager 2010. So now, this is just SharePoint. You can go and you can style this with different colors or fonts or whatever you want. You can add in additional pages on the left here. You can customize this and have different web parts. This is what we call the service catalog. This is just a Silverlight-based web part hosted inside of a SharePoint page. If you wanted to, you could have additional web parts up above it or next to it, or you could even remove this if you wanted to. So there's lots of flexibility. I'm sure that partners and Microsoft over time will add additional web parts that can be hosted on top of the SharePoint-based portal here. So all the functionality that we had in the 2010 portal has been ported to Service Manager. So you still have things like the ability to search the knowledge base from the portal. That's what you do here on the Help Articles page. My Requests is where you view the status of any requests that you've made, whether they're incidents or service requests or whatever. You can update the action log now in the portal. You can close them, do that type of stuff. And then My Activities is where you go and view the review activities that have been assigned to you, and you can vote on those, or you can view the manual activities that have been assigned to you, and you can mark them completed. So basically the same thing as what we had in 2010. So the real difference on the 2012 portal is the service catalog, and this has been completely redesigned such that it's really configuration driven, right? So if you look at the portal, it's organized first by category. That's what these things are right here. And then inside of there you have what we call service offerings. And a service offering is really just a container of what we call request offerings. So if we drill into the virtualization service offering, you can see that we provide a number of different request offerings. So out of the box, 2012 service catalog is completely bare, right? You start by populating from a blank slate. We just recently released the System Center Cloud Services Process Management Pack in beta form, and that process management pack, all you have to do is import it, and it introduces some additional request offerings here in the portal. So all these except for this one that I created as a test, these all came from the System Center Cloud Services Process Management Pack. Really the goal there is to accelerate the adoption of private cloud and having people request new capacity, deploy VMs, that type of thing from the service catalog here, and then have that be automated on the back end by Orchestrator, talking to Virtual Machine Manager. So just to kind of take a look at an example that everybody can probably resonate with, this one is to create a virtual machine request here. So this is what we call the request offering landing page. So here you can provide some kind of high-level description of the request offering. You can link to some knowledge articles if you want to have people read up on some knowledge prior to submitting an incident or request in case they need to have more information, or maybe they can solve the problem themselves before filing the request. Then you can relate it to other service offerings and so on. But really the interesting part is when you go to the actual form here, right? So these forms for each request offering are configuration driven. I'll show you what the wizard looks like to create these forms here in just a minute. But this is where you prompt the user for whatever information the IT team needs to fulfill that request. So it could be a request that's needed by somebody to perform some manual task to fulfill the request, or it could be information which is passed through to either a service manager workflow or an orchestrator runbook to do something automatically. So here you can see the user can choose their urgency level. They can, right now I don't have this in our, I don't have any capacity pools created in my system right now, but the idea here is with this is that you can query the database and present a list of objects to the user to choose from, right? So there's different types of prompts that we have here. So like the first one there is a text prompt. This is an enumeration prompt. This is what we call a query results prompt. Here's another text prompt, another text prompt. Go to the next page here. This is an integer type of prompt. This is a text prompt. Here's a date time picker. And once you're done, then you can submit the request. This will then go and create a service request in the database, SR2795. So we're going to go over here. There's the new service request that we created. Come on. Okay, so you can see that we captured all the user input here in this user input section, and then certain prompts are mapped to property values. Like the first question that was in that form was mapped to the title property and was populated here. The urgency prompt was mapped to the urgency field here, so that was populated here. So, and then you can also map the input that the user provides to properties on the child activities as well. And so that's how you pass the information through to somebody that's going to perform a manual task, that they have it right there as part of their manual task object, or you can map the properties of a runbook or automated activity in Service Manager, and that way you can pass the input from the user all the way through to workflows or runbooks that might execute things automatically. So I know we're kind of running out of time here, so I'll just show you real quickly how you can configure these things. So here's the virtual machine request. We're down here, properties. Here's the virtual machine request offering. So the way that you create these is you just go through a wizard and you specify the questions you want to ask the user, indicate what type of response you're expecting, whether it's a text response, a date time property, etc. And then you specify the mapping of the responses to the properties. So, okay, so here's what it looks like. Here's a name. You can optionally configure an icon for it, description. Each request offering is backed by a template, which effectively defines the process. So you define all your activities and that kind of thing as part of the template. You specify the default values essentially as part of the template. And then here's where you specify the questions that you're going to ask the user, what type of question it's going to be. And you can configure the details of these, and then you can specify whether they're required or optional. Here on the configure prompt, this is where you go and you specify some validation criteria, and this is different depending upon the type of prompt. Then you map the prompts. So in this case, the prompt for urgency was mapped to the urgency property, the prompt for the title was mapped to the title property, and so on. And then you can relate it to knowledge articles, and you have a published flag here. So only those request offerings which are marked as published are pushed out to the SharePoint site. And then just kind of one last point on this is that you can group together these request offerings and service offerings to create kind of service catalog groups, and then you can assign those to user roles. So somebody coming in that's in the finance department might have access to certain request offerings which are only available to people in finance, and somebody that's not in finance might come in and they wouldn't see those. So you can actually control the visibility of those request offerings on the portal using user roles. So that was a lightning fast demo of the self-service portal. Hopefully that was useful to people. I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Awesome. Thank you, Travis. Anybody have any questions regarding the portal or anything while we have Travis on the line still?
Hey, Travis, this is Pete. I have a real quick question. Can you use those user input properties in as criteria in views or within workflow?
So if it's mapped to a property on an object, absolutely, right? Like we prompt the user for the urgency, and when the
Right.
user submitted it, that value is stored in the urgency property.
Yeah.
So that's certainly possible. But then the other thing you can do is, looks like that one got fulfilled, but let's look at this one here. So you saw the list of,
Specifically about something that's not going to get mapped.
right, so right now, it's actually required to map every prompt to a property. We're hopefully going to fix that here pretty soon, but right now it's required.
Okay.
The other thing is that maybe on the form that you saw earlier, there was that user input section that listed out each of the prompts and what the response was.
Right.
This is actually stored in a single property as a wad of XML.
Oh, okay.
If you want to, you can pick up that XML, parse it apart, and do what you want to with it as part of your own book or something.